now that we are emerging from COVID, we have realized as teachers, as parents, as Wildcats, that we may need to do education a little bit differently. That there are some things that have happened to us in the past 4 or 5 years that have affected our children and our students and our teachers, and we need to take a step back and make sure that we are purposefully and meaningfully taking care of everyone's wellness. So we created a wellness plan this summer to help, again, make sure that we are taking care of the mental, social, emotional, and physical health of our students and our families and our teachers. And these parent education nights are one aspect of that plan. So I'm thrilled tonight to kick off our focus on mental health in children, and these 4 experts are going to tell you everything you need to know and answer every question that you have. Do note they're each going to cover a topic that's near and dear to them and that they have great experience in for the first portion of the session, and then there will be time for questions and answers.
A little bit of what I'm going to talk on today is what anxiety looks like, specifically in kids. So I want to start out by really picking apart the difference between stress and anxiety, because we usually kind of hear them talked about interchangeably, and they're not the same. So stress is your body's response to a trigger or an external cause. And stress can be both positive and negative. You can have really positive stress, like getting a new job or getting a house, something that can happen that makes you more motivated. You can also have negative stress, something that can be a little bit like, okay, I have this really big project that I have to do at work and it's making me a little uneasy. The biggest difference between the two is that with stress, after that external cause is gone, your stress subsides. Anxiety is more internal. So it is a persistent feeling of dread, of uneasiness that can make you significantly impaired. It can make you not want to get out of bed. It can make you really scared to be around people and create social phobias. Can make you say, I don't like being in these specific settings. I don't like going these places because it makes me very scared. I'm looking for exits. I'm not comfortable here. And it doesn't go away when that perceived threat is in the past. So let's say you are afraid to go to Walmart and it is really hard for you to even get in the car and go. Even after you leave Walmart, you may still have that fear of going to big department stores later and still be afraid when that thought comes up again about all the things that could have went wrong. But both affect your body and your mind. Now, I do want to ask everyone a question about when you think of a bodily response to anxiety, what is the first thing that you think of? Of like, oh, I'm feeling anxious. What sensation do you think of? Y'all are awesome. And so, yes, so a lot of times when we think of symptoms of anxiety, the most common ones are, of course, I am really sweaty, or, those heart palpitations, like, oh my gosh, I have a rapid heart rate. Things feel a little bit different. But for kids even, those things can be exacerbated even more. You can have difficulty controlling your worry, a feeling of being really tired even, of like, even the thought of like having to do all these things is making me exhausted. Difficulty concentrating, which again can often be misdiagnosed as other things instead of that feeling of anxiety. It can be irritability, some muscle tension. I know a lot of us like to do this and hold our shoulders up to our ears when we're nervous, or not getting really good restful sleep. The exaggerated startle response, headaches. Has anyone in here ever experienced like you had a really hard, stressful day, and at the end of the day, you notice like, oh my gosh, my head hurts. Like I've actually been processing a lot, and I didn't even stop and think, how am I feeling? Am I feeling calm? Am I feeling nervous? And so it's important to notice those kind of physical ways that anxiety can show up. Also, shortness of breath, that hyperventilating of like, oh my gosh, I'm so nervous that my body is then having this response. But one of the things that we try and bring awareness to is noticing those responses in our body so that we can actually pay attention to what's happening in our minds. So this is my little fun diagram about what happens when we experience anxiety. A lot of people call it the ABCs of CBT. Guys, I wish you could see it. Yeah. And so in our little star here is where things start. So that external cause, that trigger. So for example, for a child, I got an F on a paper that I really, really needed to do well on. And so that trigger may cause a thought. That thought may be, I'm not good at writing papers. But then that thought causes a feeling of dread, of uneasiness, those feelings of anxiety, that feeling of I'm not good at anything, or I don't perform well in school. But then after that feeling, we get those sensations, those body responses, that rapid heart rate, that headache, that fidgeting, any of those sensations happen there. But what happens if we're not paying attention to those sensations is they then impact behavior. And that's when we as parents will see, okay, something's a little off. I'm noticing my child is a little more withdrawn, or they don't want to go to the same places or hang out with the same people. And a lot of times we aren't as able to point out in other people what's happening until it's a behavior. And what I hope a few of you guys gain here today is to notice those sensations and feelings and help your children create language to communicate those things with you. And so in that, when you should seek support for anxiety. So I should probably start with this. I'm also a positive discipline parent educator. So helping parents kind of help create safe spaces for their children where they feel like they can discipline them in a way that is empowering and encouraging. And in that, a lot of times we create spaces for our kids that are safer to communicate really hard things. And it can be really hard to communicate, I don't feel like I'm doing well in school, and it's affecting my self-esteem. I don't feel like I'm good at test taking. I don't feel like I'm worth anything. Having a safe place to create those things at home is wonderful, because about 15% of all teens report some type of symptoms of anxiety disorder by the time they're 18. And so if beforehand they know how to notice those sensations, how to notice those behaviors, how to notice those feelings and communicate them, we as parents and as support people and caregivers can help them navigate that a little bit more. So as a parent, a student, a friend, or a caregiver, it's important to seek support when anxiety is keeping you or your child or the person that you're caring for, it's keeping them from performing the things that they need to do. Like, love you, but you have to do your homework. You have to shower, which sometimes anxiety, if you are feeling really tense, you're feeling really drained and fatigued, basic hygiene can become really hard. You have to, wake up and get to school at a good time so that you're not missing any instruction. If you're noticing those things of the things that you have to do are really becoming hard for you, that's a wonderful time to seek support. If anxiety is impacting more than just the areas of life that are meaningful for them. So if they are impacting, your child has had a best friend that they hang out with all the time, and all of a sudden they're like, I don't want to hang around people. I'm nervous to hang around people, and are using that kind of language, wonderful time to seek support. Or if feelings of anxiety last more days than not for a prolonged period of time. So usually our DSM time is about 6 months, but your children, the kids that are in your life. If it's been 2 weeks and you're like, something is weird, absolutely let someone know. And if not, you can reach out to anyone in this room and how to seek that type of support. Another wonderful thing would be what I like to call asking curiosity questions instead of leading questions. So a leading question would be, are you sad? Are you angry? And you're assuming the feeling already, instead of tell me what's going on. That open-ended question, let them see that you are curious about what's happening in their day. So I'm noticing you guys aren't hanging out anymore. Tell me about that. Something that gives them space to fill it in and not an assumption of what that feeling is. And then they have a lot of room to just tell you what's going on. And so with coping with anxiety, it can start by, again, identifying what is happening in the body, or triggers of anxiety. One of the best things to help kids do that as adults is to model it. I know that one's scary. But in that, a lot of times for adults, and I'm sure my colleagues would say very similar things, of like a lot of us were not taught how to do that, or taught that we are allowed to say hard things are happening in my body, or I am noticing that I am really sweaty, and usually when this happens, I get really uncomfortable and scared, and I think that's my body telling me that I'm uncomfortable and scared. And so when that happens, I think I want to do this. But talking those things out loud then lets your kids see, wow, this is a person. Not just mom, not just dad, not just teacher, not just principal, but this person experiences the same or similar things that I do, and this is how they cope with it. Because if they're not shown, oh, this is what happens that can work, they're just out here just guessing. And that's okay. And I think it's wonderful that we're in this age of resources. We have technology at our fingertips. You can Google how to cope with anxiety, right? And so quickly have answers, but we are the people that are closest to them. And so if we can model that language, let's do that. And so the bodily sensations that usually can happen in kids that they may express to you is like, I don't know, I'm feeling a knot in my throat. Like, I know I got to go up here and I have to say this big speech today, and I'm just feeling it here, or I'm feeling the pit in my stomach. Know what those things mean. Know that that person may be experiencing a little bit increased stress or a little bit of increased anxiety. An urge to suddenly go to the bathroom, of like, oh my gosh, I'm so nervous. Nervousness can cause that. Nervousness can cause GI issues. Rapid heart rate, excessive sweating, chest tightness, dizziness, or even sudden hot and cold flashes. So if you're noticing that you or a child nearby to you is experiencing those things, help them work through them. And if you can identify what's happening in your body, you can then communicate how or when you need support. If you are saying, I feel a pit in my stomach, and then as a parent, you'll say, that usually means I'm nervous. Is that about the same for you? And helping your child identify how those things are different and how they're the same. So I wanted to touch on a couple of techniques to manage some anxiety symptoms. So we do what we like to call square breathing. I've heard it called 1,000,005 different things. But really, it's encouraging a hold. Because in that, if you notice that rapid heart rate, what can happen when we are trying to deep breathe is this, which leads to hyperventilating. We don't want that. We don't want hyperventilating. And so what square breathing is using shapes to encourage a hold. So in that, there'll be a breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, and then exhale for 4. But in that, you're encouraging those holds of like pause with your breath. You don't have to breathe in and breathe out and breathe in and breathe out. You take time to inhale slowly and exhale for the same amount of time, but pause between that. Pause and notice what's happening in your body, where you are. The stop technique, or I've heard it called 1,000,000 different things, but usually we just like to call it this stop technique or thought stopping, which is when you notice bodily sensations that are consistent with anxiety in your body, that pit in your stomach, that knot in your throat, physically saying out loud to yourself, stop, stop, let me body scan. Let me go from my head to my toes and notice where I'm holding tension, and like focus on relaxing them, doing some of that progressive muscle relaxation. Let me notice where I'm holding tension. Let me roll my shoulders back, twist in my chair, get up, give myself some wiggles, whatever those things are, to notice what is at, like stop and notice, what is my body doing right now? I know the feeling, what sensations are happening, so that I can then stop the behavior. There is 1,020,000 mindfulness exercises that you can do. One of my favorites that a lot of kiddos that I have worked with, and I do, it's called Be the Pond. And I wish I would have like put the whole thing up here. But what Be the Pond is you label all these fish as feelings. So you have an angry fish, a sad fish, a frustrated fish, a excited fish, and you okay all the fish. Okay, I'm noticing an angry fish, I'm noticing a happy fish, I'm noticing an excited fish. Your job is not to be the fish, your job is to be the pond, be the water that they all coexist in. and notice that within yourself. And so when you are doing Be the Pond, you stop and you say, what fish are you noticing? You may be noticing an angry fish. Hey, angry fish, you're okay to be here. There may be a happy fish. Hey, happy fish, you're okay to be here too. Because what we sometimes do is we label those feelings as good or bad, and they're not. They're just feelings, and they're okay for us to have them. And so if we have that level of acceptance with the feelings that we have, it's easier to communicate because we don't think they're bad to communicate. And so encourage kiddos, yourself, be the pond, be the water that all those things exist in. Sometimes your angry fish is going to be a lot bigger than your happy fish, or your anxious fish is going to be a lot bigger than your sad fish or your grieving fish. All of those fish are there. You can exist with your feelings and not in them. And then visualization techniques, which is my favorite, because I will visualize that I'm on a beach somewhere and a very in a hot second, like, oh, okay, it's okay. Today's a little stressful, but I'm on the beach. And it's okay, and I'm warm, and I feel excited, and I feel the sun in my hair, and visualize a place that is better, more comfortable, less stressful than where you are in a healthy way of like, I'm still recognizing where I'm at. A lot of mindfulness too is grounding and noticing where you are. I actually had one of my clients create her own grounding exercise that I now use all the time. It's her fairy chain. And so to notice where she's at in the room, she closes her eyes and imagines that there's lines of fairies going from her to the wall. And you can do anything. You can do a fairy, you can do balls, and you close your eyes and you imagine where they are, and then she moves and imagines how the fairies move with her and how much space she's taking up in her room. And if she moves her arm, what's happening? This girl's like 9. And I'm like, that's brilliant. and now I constantly do it. I'm like, okay, let's do our fairy chains and let's notice, there's a chair right here. I wonder if we turn, how do we make our fairies hit our chair? And really increase our bodily awareness so that when we're experiencing those sensations, we can say, oh, those are the things that are happening.
Resilience is one of the things that I get asked about as a psychologist most frequently. So people ask me, is resilience just something you're born with? Like you're just born stronger and more resilient? Is it something that that I can create more of for myself? And most importantly, the question tonight that I really want to talk about is how can we create resilience in our children? So when I talk about resilience, I want to be clear what I'm talking about. I'm talking about it doesn't mean that resilient people never experience stress or distress or anxiety. Resilience just means that you are good at bouncing back after hardships and challenges. Maybe even you grow from difficult situations. We all know we can't eliminate stressors from our children's lives. P.S. I tried a little bit. And I think a lot of us try. But it's just not possible. But we can create situations for them that cultivate resilient characteristics so that they can handle the stress better. And it's really a long learning process that starts at home. So I look at resilience as psychological immunity. If I get a cold, I take more vitamin C to help build up my immunity so that I heal faster, right? So that stressful thing of the cold doesn't last as long. Psychological immunity or resilience is basically creating a buffer for your child against the environmental stressors that are inevitable. So, one metaphor that I like to provide is marathons, right? So we don't just, if you're gonna run a marathon or a half marathon for that matter, you don't just wake up one morning and go out and run a marathon. There's lots of preparation. There's training, you're paying attention to training, nutrition, hydration, mindset, sleep. A lot of things go into that event, weeks and weeks of preparation. And so I really want us to approach life with our children in the same way, to ask how can we create resilience for them to deal with the marathon of life. So I want to spend most of my time talking about how. The first thing is structure. Structuring schedule and home life and routine kind of bleeds into the next thing on my list to create habits, healthy habits for them. So we really want to set the stage with structure that will prioritize physical needs. Because if kids aren't getting the right nourishment, food, sleep, exercise, hydration, if those physical needs aren't being adequately met, then they're not going to be their best selves. They're not going to be as resilient as they could be. And I bet a lot of you are thinking, well, I meet those. Like, I can check that box, right? I'm sure all of your children, right? They have food, they have shelter, they have clothing. But I really want you to look closely at this, right? Look closely at how much sleep they're getting. Google it. Look up how much sleep they should be getting at different ages, because it changes, right? Let's face it, most of us adults aren't getting enough sleep. And when we do, we feel a lot better. So 5-year-olds need between 10 and 12 hours of sleep to be their best. And they're not getting it, most of them. Imagine what it takes if you're a working parent to get your child to sleep so that they can get 12 hours of sleep. It's hard, okay? So we've got to really pay attention to make sure they're getting the right food, the right amount of sleep. Just getting food and sleep and water isn't enough, right? We can really set them up for success when we pay close attention to this. And believe me, I've been in survival mode. I have 2 kids. There have been weeks where, we all have them. I'm not talking about being perfectionistic, and I certainly wasn't. But just doing our best in this area and paying attention to it. The next one is problem solving together. So what I mean by this is, and of course it varies at different ages, how much that you can involve them in the problem solving process. But I think even starting at a young age, and I trust your judgment about what's appropriate for different ages, you can begin to involve them in the problem-solving process. So instead of solving problems for them, inviting them into whatever the stressor is or the problem is, and brainstorming and talking about getting ideas, being creative, being flexible. Let them learn how to problem solve instead of just solving problems for them. It empowers them, right? It makes them more independent people. And it sets them up for dealing with stressors as they get older. Family meetings can be a really great way to do that. Not saying my children loved it when we had family meetings, but they're both adults now and they kind of joke about it. But especially if we had a hard week ahead, maybe their dad was going to be out of town and I was going to be single parenting, or maybe I had a lot going on with work or they had a lot going on. It really helped us to sit down and say, okay, look, this is our calendar this week. This is what we all have to do. Let's talk about how we can do it well, right? Let's talk about how we can support each other. The next one you heard from Natwan, and it is set the example. So this doesn't mean acting strong and stoic like nothing is wrong, okay? This means setting the example of talking about stress and sharing how you cope with it in healthy ways. So a lot of people have a lot of different beautiful ways of coping that they could share with their kids. Let them see you experiencing stress. Let them know that you're okay, right? Let them see you managing your time and setting boundaries and figuring out healthy ways to cope. That example is obviously critical for how they learn a lot of things. The next one is fun. So a lot of people forget about this. I consider fun a basic human need. And there is so much research about laughter, that laughter builds physical immunity. Scientific research that backs this up. It's really exciting, right? Because laughter is free, and it's something we can all do. So having fun. The laughter actually alters neurotransmitters in our brain. It actually releases endorphins. So encourage that. Help them find space to laugh, even in hard times. There's a reason why we get together with friends and family and tell funny stories and laugh, even at funerals. You guys probably remember doing that. It's therapeutic. It's important. It's healthy. Next is self-esteem. Obviously, we all want our kids to have good self-esteem. right? And I just wanted to touch on that because I have a lot of people come to me and they're great families and they're stable and they're kind to their children, but their kids are still struggling with self-esteem. And it's confusing, right? Because unfortunately, you are not, the parents, the people in the home are not the only people contributing to children's self-esteem. And it can be very fragile. It doesn't mean that you as a parent did anything wrong, okay? But remember that the words are important and compliments and praise are great, but really trying to put your kids in situations where they feel empowered, where they have an opportunity to be praised by people in addition to you. Things like teams, or leadership opportunities, or volunteer opportunities. They're really powerful experiences that are good things, and they grow in many, many ways through those things, but self-esteem is one of them. And obviously, if they're feeling better about themselves, they're going to be more resilient. Next is teaching daily, accessible forms of self-care. So in our culture, I hear a lot of people talk about big, extravagant ways of practicing self-care, right? I mean, I tell my husband that like pedicures and massages are just standard, but those are really big things. Like I can't do those things every day. No one can. So I think it's important that we teach our kids that self-care can be really simple, and a lot of self-care can be free. And to find ways to integrate those simple, maybe things that don't take much time, then they're empowered to integrate self-care into their everyday life, right? So for me, it might be as simple as lighting a candle with a scent that I like while I'm doing some work. That's a form of self-care, right? It's simple. Costs a little bit to buy the candle, but not much, right? It might be drinking water. It might be going to bed early. I know that might be more for the parents than the kids. I know they don't see that as self-care. But you get the idea. Meditating, again, once you have that skill, it's something you can do anywhere. Breathing exercises, like the ones Natwan was teaching. Washing your face, right? Seems pretty simple to me. Taking a shower, calling a friend, taking a break if you're getting overwhelmed, just taking a break and stepping away for 5 minutes, spending some time outside in nature. These are simple things that people can do every day. So make sure that you're talking about those forms of self-care, because then when they do them, they're not taking them for granted. They're more likely to appreciate them and benefit from them. The next one is setting boundaries. There are millions of different ways that you could set boundaries and teach your kids to set boundaries. I'm just going to talk about a few that I feel are really pertinent to children. One is the news. So I, especially in times of big crises like when 9/11 happened, or when the pandemic first started, or now the war in Israel, I like to suggest that people recommend to their children that they set limits on how much news they're watching. I want them to be informed. I think that's really healthy. I hope you guys are talking about these current events, but I don't want them to be immersed. So remember, the goal is informed, not immersed. And for very young children, really watching where they're taking in news and making sure that it's age appropriate and they're not seeing any scary pictures. Another area of boundaries to think about is phones, right? So maybe setting phone boundaries for the whole family, like places in the house where phones just don't go, right? Maybe it's the dinner table, or a certain room. Times of day that are phone-free times are great boundaries. So let them see you, for younger children, set boundaries for them. They don't have the self-discipline to do that. For older children, work with them on learning how to set boundaries for themselves, so you kind of make a shift. And for all children, set the example of good boundaries for yourself. Next is facilitate. What I mean by this is, instead of doing things for them, as they're able, teach them how to do it for themselves. So you're teaching them, you're demonstrating, you're role-playing, you're supporting, encouraging, and empowering. Again, creating that confidence that they can do things for themselves. They're not going to get that if we keep doing everything for them and letting them fail. We'll get more to that in a minute. Unconditional love, again, this is standard, right? Unconditional love should be the heart of every family. Every child should have it. Unfortunately, they don't. I want to touch on some places where I think well-meaning people might miss for opportunities to provide that unconditional love. One is that words are important, and so what I mean by this is praising them for trying instead of focusing on the end result. So instead of praising them for getting an A, praising them for their hard work. Because when you do that, first of all, then you're reinforcing the hard work, right? And then they're going to feel good about themselves even if they make a B next time, as long as they did the hard work. And they know that you love them regardless. Another place where words are important with unconditional love is labeling the behavior, not the child. So instead of saying, Billy, you were bad yesterday, saying, Billy, your behavior was bad yesterday. Big difference. And those words are really important to little kids. They really internalize it. Now we're coming back to the mistakes that I mentioned a minute ago. I like to tell people to expect and accept mistakes, your own and your children. And let them see you owning mistakes, admitting them, apologizing for them, and learning from them. Remember, back to that setting the example, right? Confidence grows in a home where children look at mistakes as normal. They know that everybody makes them, including you, and they look at mistakes as opportunities to grow. You can't, and I don't want you to try to prevent mistakes. I see a lot of helicopter parents just running around in circles, trying to prevent their kids from failing. And I don't think that is serving them well. Expect them to fail, accept that it's going to happen sometimes, see it as an opportunity for growth. Your main responsibility is to help them learn from it and let them know that you love them anyway, not to prevent the mistake. The next thing is ask, and again, a little bit of overlap with Natwan. Ask them how their day is. Ask them how things are going. Give them opportunities to talk. How many of you have teenagers? Aren't they cute? They're just precious. Teenagers, when you ask, has anybody noticed that when you ask them how their day was, they're not very interested in talking about it? Anybody? Come on. Y'all, I had 2 of these. I know that they do this.
Their favorite word is fine.
What's that?
Their favorite word is fine.
Fine. One word response. Oh yeah, good, fine. Has anybody noticed that about 9 o'clock, when you're about to go to sleep, they come in your room? They're really cute. And they go, hey mom, hey dad, I want to tell you something. And you're like, oh, okay. And you sit back up and talk to them, right? And that's good. Because what I was going to say is ask and listen, accept that as they get older into the teen years, they are less talkative, especially on demand, right? They're kind of like cats. That's what my husband and I always said. We're like, our daughters are like cats. They only come to us when they feel like it. So when they come to you, especially as teens, and they're ready to talk, sit back up, get some coffee, stop whatever you're doing and listen. And instead of jumping in to problem solve, ask them, how can I help you? How can I support you with what you're telling me? Because if you ask them, they'll probably tell you. And a lot of times they don't want you to problem solve. They just want to talk. So it's good to ask. And next, just be open. Again, Natwan talked about this. Be open to mental health. Be open to talking about your mental health and mental health in general. Be open to getting professional help. And I think Natwan did a great job of explaining, when to seek professional help. And also understand that kids don't always want that help. So if they don't want it, you can't make them get it, unfortunately. It will not be beneficial to them. So just offering it, letting them know you love them and you're happy to provide that, and keep reminding them that it's there for them when they want it. Next is just a couple more points, focusing on what's in your control. So this is like a superpower, you guys, because when we're stressed, we feel really out of control, right? A lot of times the stuff we're stressed about is out of our control. But there is so much more that's in our control. And this little slide just lists some of the things that are key. And one of them is your perspective. So that gets to the thoughts piece. Your thoughts are your perspective, right? And helping them to have a healthy perspective on things. It's really powerful. It's a game changer. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is gratitude. Because the happiest people I know practice gratitude continuously. Another superpower, you know? So that's why I parceled out these two things on my last two slides. Gratitude and focusing on what's in your control, because they are big. So if they can hear you practicing gratitude, and it may be simple things just continuously, like, oh, gosh, that wait person was so nice and they were so good. You know, it's really nice when you have a competent wait person, right? Or, oh, that person was so nice when they held the door for us, right? Or did you see that person return their card at the grocery store? Right? That's so good. That's what we're supposed to do, right? That's awesome. By the way, I hate it when people don't return their cards at the grocery store. I mean, really, so simple. So practicing gratitude out loud, letting them hear you do it, and maybe finding a way to integrate it into your family life, like at dinner. Let's talk about 3 good things in your day. Everybody go around the table, tell me 3 good things. That's a great way to start them on that habit of practicing gratitude. So I'll leave you with a quote from James Faust about gratitude. A grateful heart is the beginning of greatness. It is an expression of humility. It is a foundation for the development of such virtues as faith, courage, contentment, happiness, love, and well-being. That's resilience. And I think that's what we all want for our kids.
I love this topic. It dovetails. Mary, you were so right. We had to send our presentations in, and she said everybody's stuff just kind of does this. So you're going to see some of the same things, but in a slightly different way. But I love this topic. Okay. So we're going to start with a quote. It's only those who will risk going too far can possibly find out how far one can go. And that is super important. We're going to talk about that. All right, so what does a safe risk taker look like? It's somebody that acts outside of their comfort zone, and we're going to talk in a little bit about the difference between impulsive and being a risk taker. And being calculated is kind of like the key there. But if you're to look at this slide, I'm going to kind of go by the slides because I have a tendency to start talking about something and just like going for it. So I'm going to stick to this. It says it's someone who can become resilient, interestingly enough. In facing challenges, they're willing to learn new skills. They can be creative. They can be bold communicators. They're usually open and flexible. The really awesome thing is that you don't have to start out as those things. You can work on that. You can grow that part of your personality. If you're shy, if you love your comfort zone in your box, you can learn to develop that other side of your personality. It's a great way for you to develop self-worth and just learn how to become more secure in yourself, stand in your own power. And I love this at the bottom about self-efficacy and self-esteem. Self-efficacy is when something happens and you know that you can handle it. And that does not come from everything in your life going perfectly all the time or being right or doing it perfectly well the first time. You grow self-esteem by managing problems. Stuff goes wrong and you handle it, and that's where you learn that you can do life, that you can do it, and that's your self-efficacy. I can do it no matter what's going on. Something goes down, I'm going to manage it. That's self-efficacy. All right. So here's the difference between risk-taking and impulsivity. We get that question all the time. Well, isn't that just being impulsive? No. So there is a difference. When you're impulsive, you're not thinking it through. You're just like, you know what? I see that gaming system. I'm going to buy it. I don't know how much is in my bank account, but I'm sure it's fine. You know, like that's kind of impulsive, or driving too fast, or experimenting with drugs and alcohol and all kinds of other addictive behaviors. That can be very impulsive. It's great in the moment, but you're not really thinking it through. In contrast, if you're a risk taker, what you want is actually doing what's called a cost analysis. Like, have you heard that? You do what's good about this situation and what's bad about this situation. But you can do it mentally, and you don't have to like write it out all the time. It can be instantaneous. But you want calculated risk. You don't just want like, I bet if I jump off this roof, I won't get hurt. I'm gonna take that risk. You don't want that. So the next one is more about impulsivity. It's very reactive. In the brain, either out the mouth, or you're acting on it, and then you have all the damage to deal with after that. We don't want that. And this slide, I'm going to let you kind of look at that for a second. It just kind of tells you some addictive stuff, some impulsive stuff. Emotional dysregulation, emotional impulsivity, that's when people can really like lose their temper, that kind of thing. Acting without regard for personal safety, that's impulsive. Anybody in here have a kid with ADHD? You know what that looks like? Yes, impulsive. I'm sure y'all know what I'm talking about there. Okay, so then what does safe risk-taking look like? I gave you some examples. Trying out for that school play, the sports team, either where you don't have any friends on it or you don't even know how to play the sport, do it anyway. Putting yourself out there to make a new friend. Well, what if they don't want to talk to me? What if nobody at this party talks to me? Running for a leadership position in an organization. What if I lose? I am a giant proponent of take your kid and you throw them to the wolves as much as possible. Do not put a bubble around your kid. Right, guys? So I loved their presentations. I kept going, yes, that's so good. Like every time they would say something. My husband wants to put our kids in like bubble wrap. And I'm like, nope, you're going to get out there. You know, I'm sorry, no. So the reason that you do that is you want them to experience failure. You want them to fail with support. You don't want the first time that they try something new and they crash and burn to be out on their own, because then what's going to happen? There's no support there. There's no one to say, oh, you tried to make a friend and that kid didn't want to talk to you. Well, that sounds like more them than you. I'm sorry. You are amazing. Like, there's no support there if they don't crash and burn with you first. So we're going to look around here. What's the takeaway? This is where it really dovetails. You want them to become unafraid of failure. I heard that. I was like, oh, this is great, because it's just going to reinforce what she said. It's just part of the learning process. That student mindset is just fail, 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 because eventually you will master it. You can't, very rarely do you start at something and you're amazing at it. You're like a genius. That's rare. Usually you suck at it at first, and you come home and you're like, oh my gosh, I am never doing that again. And a good parent will be like, yep, you're doing it tomorrow. Sorry, you're going out there again, because everybody fails. And one of the things you don't want to do is be that parent that's like, oh gosh, what if they don't do it? What if they can't do it right? They're going to embarrass themselves. You want them to embarrass themselves. You want them to get embarrassed. You want them to get disappointed. You want them to learn how to manage those feelings. And you want them to learn that as young as possible. The last thing that you want to do is be like, oh my gosh, okay, we're going to go over here. So come on, can you imagine having a 21-year-old going, we're going to college, okay? What order are we going to be in? No. You want them to learn how to do that on their own. So fail a lot. If they haven't failed enough, then go fail some more. And if they come home and they say, oh, I bombed that test, what are we going to do about it? How are you going to manage that? What are you going to do differently? Oh, you got in a fight with your friend and you got in trouble, you had to go see Miss Holly. Where'd she go? She laughed already, dang. Well, how did that feel? It probably didn't feel really good. How are you going to manage that next time? So that's kind of what you want to do. I sort of flew through these because I'm trying to be a little bit cognizant of our time. And I sort of put something on here. I was like, I wonder if we have the ability to do all kinds of montages. Taking safe risks is the perfect thing to see montages on. Does anybody remember Rocky when he starts off and he's like, oh my God, I can't do it. And then he keeps going and then he gets like the champion. There's so many movies that have these montages. So here's the deal. Life is a grand adventure. It is not to be hidden away from. Send your kid out there to go live their life, because guess what? You're at home to say, I am so sorry that didn't work out. You know what? It'll be better next time. You know what I'm saying?
And I love you anyway.
And I love you anyway. And let me tell you about the time that I totally failed at something. Listen to this, kid. You think that's bad. You know how all your parents do that to you? Well, do it to your kids. So that's kind of the takeaway. Safely and doing cost analysis along the way. So not impulsive risk taking, calculated risk taking.
I'm talking today about grief. And even though I'm talking about grief, why am I talking about grief when I'm a trauma counselor? Grief is not always just a person passing. It has to do with loss. And so grief comes with being human, and it is a normal and natural response to loss. And we all just went through a collective thing, such as COVID, right? And so we all had different kinds of grief. So just wanted to kind of briefly talk about that and acknowledge that some of the families that we have, some of the children that we have been going through some grief. So what is it? Most people think of it as sadness, but it could be anger, it could be guilt, it could be all of these things up on top. It could be confusion, anxiety, it could be fear, it could be all of these things. And so one thing, again, in terms of grief is that sometimes when we think about grief, we think of it as, again, someone dying, but there are different kinds of grief. So the other ones are the 4 types, which are stigmatized loss, ambiguous loss, anticipatory grief, and disenfranchised grief. I'm not going to go into such technical terms, but I just wanted you to all kind of understand it. In that stigmatized loss has to do with loss related to maybe suicide or homicide, so things that have some kind of stigma related to it. Infertility. Ambiguous loss is maybe when someone is still there, but maybe their presence is not fully there. So such as maybe separation or divorce, or maybe someone being deployed because of military. Another one is anticipatory grief, which is pretty self-explanatory, but that's maybe someone got diagnosed. And so the person who got diagnosed might have anticipatory grief, but the loved ones might also have anticipatory grief as well. And last one is disenfranchised grief, which is pet loss, friendship ending. That one is one where society doesn't always acknowledge that kind of loss. And that's where I see a lot, not pet loss, but disenfranchised grief is the kind that I see when I work through trauma. And I wanted to mention that children are often under this category because even as parents and adults and caregivers, sometimes when we're going through our own losses, for well intentions, we're trying to protect our children, and sometimes they are having some grief that they're not acknowledging, or they might not have language around as well. So one thing I wanted to note is that grief can impact the brain, and there is forgetfulness, there's trouble thinking clearly, confusion, sometimes there's memory problems, difficulty processing information. So it can look different ways, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So, COVID-19 has impacted almost all of us in different ways. Again, not always just through someone dying. And one thing I wanted to note is that child bereavement is one of the top predictors of poor outcomes at school. So, what is trauma? Trauma, most people think of as something big, such as like sexual assault or war. However, trauma is any event that is experienced as scary or threatening that has negative and long-lasting effects. So that's why I really wanted to bring this topic up, in that we've all experienced a trauma, even if we might not acknowledge it. So common signs of how it's shown in the home, I've kind of separated into elementary and middle school, and they're pretty similar. Except for the violent outbursts, mostly are usually middle and high school, but it can look different ways. So elementary and other middle school and high school, they might feel anxious, they might not be able to sleep at night, they might have, I think Natwan talked about having to go to the bathroom, right? So maybe they might say they have headaches or stomach aches or sweating. You might notice that they have changes in grades or withdrawing. So it can look different ways. And then it can look different in the classroom as well too. So maybe they used to have friends that they used to talk with, and now they're withdrawing. They might have outbursts, and they usually are pretty well behaved. So it can look different ways. And again, I put down misdiagnosis and trauma. A lot of times I see that some of my clients or children have these kinds of diagnoses, And sometimes they might be related to trauma, but I'm not saying that it's always because of a trauma, but there can be very similar and sometimes, at the same time. So a trauma response can look like ADHD, anxiety, oppositional defiant disorder, depression. They might look like they, aren't processing, or they're seem lazy. So again, that's why I wanted to note that trauma isn't always what you think it is, and it can be kind of something that accumulates over time. So everyone has talked about how to support children, right? We have all gone through difficult things. It's honestly, unfortunately, a part of life, right? But when we're talking about grief, at least just in terms of someone passing, the most intense parts of grief usually fade in 4 to 6 months. But with the holidays coming up, right, there are waves of grief that happen, especially during the holidays, during birthdays, or other events such as graduation, right? Some people weren't able to attend graduation, and that was really difficult for some people. Maybe some people were having funerals and they couldn't attend, or they couldn't be visited in the hospital. So one way to support children and adolescents is to include children in rituals and activities that might help remember a loved one. With the holidays, some cultures might honor ancestors or loved ones in certain ways. And being able to, again, talking about being open, right? Talking about the person who is missing in our life. And so how to support acceptance of the death, kind of talking about that and being able to say, this is related more to just ongoing, not just death related, but how to make sure that we have warmth and affection. And I know Catherine had mentioned structure and routine, right? So the pandemic was a really difficult time and time of uncertainty, So even though we're not in the height of the pandemic, a lot of us are still experiencing the loss of things. A lot of us are still, again, as a trauma therapist, trauma is stored in the body and is stored in capsules in the body. And so one might not be aware that they're experiencing the trauma or that they're still having these impacts. And so it's really important to be able to try to keep things as structured and as routine as possible. And so I'm gonna go over this because everyone had mentioned it already, but in terms of grief, a lot of people think that grief shrinks over time. And in reality, we grow around our grief. I didn't mention the slide that was talking about the stages of grief. And that is something that a lot of people think that goes in a linear phase. And everyone also thinks about grief in a timeline, like, oh, you get 2 weeks of bereavement time, and that's not how it goes. So just wanted to acknowledge that as time goes on, some of us are feeling pieces and in different waves. So everyone has been talking about all the different ways to, support our children. One thing that because I work mostly with adults, but I wanted to acknowledge the fact that as parents, we're always modeling, right? And so one thing that I teach parents, things that I teach adults, that I teach kids, that I taught my kid this morning, or not taught her, but I modeled and said, I'm having anxiety right now, and what I'm doing is I'm doing this technique. So this is something that I like to teach all people, and I just wanted to share, which is the 5-4-3-2-1 rule, which is grounding. And you can teach your children, and you can acknowledge, like, hey, I'm stressed out right now. Why don't you name 5 things with me that we can see, 4 things that we can feel, 3 things we can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. So again, the reason why I'm bringing this up is that trauma and grief can look in so many different ways. It might not look as sadness. It could look like anxiety. It can look like irritability. It could look like frustration. It could look as so many different things. So really to just summarize what everyone said is that it's complicated in terms of mental health and in terms of stress and anxiety and some of the things that our children are dealing with. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to a counselor, since we are able to acknowledge some of the different nuances that aren't always readily available.
I think for me,
the biggest that I see kind of around the board kind of is the same with like what I said with parents is showing kids that you are not afraid of hard emotion.
Yeah.
Hard.
That's good.
Yeah, and letting, really holding space. And it's, granted it's hard when you're in a classroom with 15 or 20 and there's one or two that are really having a hard time, but I've seen a lot of adults really label anger as bad and sadness is bad and like, we don't do that and that's bad or that's good or I want to see you feel this way instead of just letting them feel. And I think if you have that safety in a classroom, academic performance is going to go through the roof, knowing that not even just at home, but with my teachers, I am able to feel and my teacher's not afraid of my feelings and like is able to hold space for me in them of like, hey, I am teaching an entire classroom right now and I am also seeing that this is happening for you and I want to be there for you right now. How can we manage the both of those? And like problem solve with that child of like, hey, I'm letting you know that this is challenging for me because I'm seeing that you're having challenging feelings and I love you so much and I want to be there for you and all these kids are here. Can we help you as a collective? Can we take a break? And not, structure is so good, but also showing them that we are people and sometimes we all need to stop. The whole classroom of just like, pause. Everyone is everywhere right now and that is telling me something and I want to respond to that and not being afraid of that. So that's probably it for me.
It's kind of like being the role model like the parents are, right? Role modeling using these strategies. And
I was going to say that I like the responding, but also being able to incorporate it in the school day. So if you can have moments where you have like a mindful moment, I know that the kids, they have like brain breaks or something, right, with the lower school. But if you're able to do it where you have like a mindful moment and you teach them like, hey, we're just going to do this as it's already part of the routine, then you're again making it obvious and apparent that it's okay to take a break. It's okay to acknowledge what's really going on and for them to be mindful. So being able to maybe incorporate it as part of the school day or the routine, whether it's, beginning of the class or middle or end, that would be maybe possibly helpful.
I wish we would teach meditation starting in kindergarten because there's so much research about how beneficial meditation is, and I think a lot of people think, ooh, meditation, like, is it hokey and weird? But it's not, I promise. And it is something like any other skill that you get better at the more you practice it. And I think the world would be a completely different place if we would do meditation. I mean, and it's not, doesn't have to be a long practice, 5-minute meditation with kids starting in kindergarten and let them begin to develop that skill set. It would be a different world.
Could be 5 minutes. Like honestly, 2 minutes. You can put like a timer and say, okay, let's do the the 4 breathing, the square breathing, or 4, 7, 8 breathing, or mindful moment. Let's visualize something. So it could be 2 minutes. It doesn't have to take forever.
Yeah, at my office, we have a 5-minute, we call it a peaceful pause. At 12 o'clock every day on everybody's computers, company-wide, somebody leads a meditation. That would be a way to integrate it into this whole school.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to just add and like also praise Mary of that, like in all of that, I love what you were saying because I think as we are becoming more aware of mental health and really like incorporating that in our day, that is college readiness. I noticed I went to UNCG and then to Wake Forest for grad school and like both had a meditation room that were almost always empty. And like imagine if when they're little we teach them like utilize these things because the research in college was showing that like if between classes people were coming here and pausing, their performance was so much better. And if that's the mission of the school. So Mary, thank you for caring and for being so amazing, but for also seeing that piece of academic readiness and college readiness of like as we are growing with children and like wanting them to be the absolute best that they are, that includes acknowledging who they are and how they're feeling.
So my thing would be a little different. I agree with this. Like, I think, yes, definitely this. But if I had to add my piece to it, I would say that if teachers could, I don't want to say this in a way that makes it seem like y'all are doing this because you're not, because I see kids from across the city and I hear from all different schools. And one of the big things is sometimes teachers can be dismissive of kids that are having these kinds of issues. I had one parent that came in, I do brain mapping, which is like the electrode cap, QEEG, we see how your brain's functioning. And this kid had all of the biological markers for ADHD, which is like high theta, low beta. That's too nerdy for most of us, but just a lot of stuff like very interconnected brain, you know, all kinds of processing issues. And the parent brought the brain map to their teacher, and the teacher laughed at the parent and said, "Your kid doesn't have ADHD." And the kid was in my office week after week with horrible anxiety, didn't want to ever go to school because they were putting so much pressure on themselves. A lot of times kids will keep it together at school, and then they fall apart as soon as they get home. And I'm sure some of you parents with kids with ADHD have that. But that ADHD is not the only issue that that's with. That can be depression. They'll hold it together, but it is so hard for them. One of the things I measure with brain mapping is cognitive efficiency. How much energy does it take your brain to get through a day? And some of these kids, they'll have 20% cognitive efficiency, meaning they take a boatload of energy to get through a day. But it looks to the teachers the kids are sitting in their class for maybe like an hour at a time. The kid's holding it together. There's nothing wrong with this kid, but their grades are bad, or they'll hear them in the hallway, or the kid just kind of like looks like doing this. And the teacher's like, "Oh, but they're fine, you know, they're fine with me." Just if a parent comes to you and says, "My kid's having this issue," for the teachers to be like, "Tell me more about it. Tell me more about it."
For younger kids especially, this is my jam, is making things visual. So
Yes.
my child is 4, and I have a 2-year-old. And I'm about to have another one. So my life's crazy. And my oldest, super excited for Halloween, okay? No sense of time. And so he can look at a calendar, and like I see the classrooms that have a calendar, but for him, if I say, "Oh, this is in 12 days, he's like, "Okay," so we do paper chains for everything. Because then there is a chain for every day, and every day you take one, and it gets smaller, and you see, "Oh, this is smaller, that means the day is closer." We do visual timers. Even up until they're about, I would probably use a visual timer with them until they're like 9.
She's going past that, but visual timers, it's called a time timer.
Yes.
And you turn it, and it's
And,
red.
it has a color. You can get it on Amazon for $12.
And then the red starts to shrink the more time they have. That could be really helpful.
Yeah,
That was good.
yeah, and it's you can get them on Amazon for like $12. But especially, I would say to kids under about 10, letting them see your time is getting smaller. That shaded area, and I think we've probably all seen them, like the old school kitchen timers that turn red. Those, but letting them see that. Now for older kids, I would still keep things pretty visual, like have a routine that is, hey, and incorporate them in making it. Hey, I'm noticing that things are not getting done, or maybe you don't want to do them. How can I support you, and like how can we share this responsibility? But also what needs to happen, what feels right for you, and then if it's not working, you can then come back, hey. I thought this would work for me, and it's not. And also be transparent about yourself. I thought I could have you in bed every night at 8 o'clock, and it's not working. So maybe let's push this back to 8:15, or maybe let's let other parent take hold of bedtime, or maybe it is something you do independently. And I can help with these things, but because I'm not going to be there, where else would you like me to be present in your life? And really incorporating them in what that routine and what that schedule is, so they don't feel like, "Oh, this is my parent telling me I have to do this, 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 and this." Because if you think about it, kids have so little control of so many things that they do in their lives. Give a little bit back to them of like, what do you want to do? Like I see there's all these things, you gotta do homework, you gotta go to baseball, you gotta do X, Y, Z. What do you wanna do, and where can we fit that in? So that they feel empowered of like, "Oh my gosh, my parent cares about the things that I like and want, but I also feel like I'm more capable of completing all these tasks because I had a say-so in like what they looked like or what time they were." Even if it was just saying, "Hey, I want to do this before this," it's still getting done. I would say if it doesn't harm them and it empowers them and it builds resilience in them, do it.
Right? When they get sick, and that they're sick because they're not getting enough sleep, they're not eating right, and they're just maxed out. That's like a little mini failure, right? We're not going to tell them that.
Yeah.
We're not going to say it that way, but that's an opportunity to talk about time management and part of why you're sick is because you're not getting enough sleep, and I notice you haven't been eating right. So let's figure that out. Like, you've got all these things you have to do. How can we prioritize and make sleep a higher priority so that you aren't as vulnerable to getting sick? And one exercise that I do with teenagers is I ask them to list their 5 biggest priorities, like values, right? So I explain to them it's general, you know, like family is one of mine, right? Friends is one of mine, work is one of mine. So I ask them to name their top 5. And no one has ever, since I've been doing this, believe it or not, said social media in their top 5. They all say the right things. They say things like family, God, friends, school, health. They say all the right things. And I think that's because those really are their values, right? And so then when we get to work off that, I'm like, okay, these are your values. You've told me what they are. How much time are you spending on each of these things per week, right? And they kind of think about it and estimate. And then I say, okay, well, let's look at our phones. How much time are we spending on our screen? Because you can look at it, right? And I go, wow. And just let them think about it. It's interesting, right? It's interesting for us to do too, by the way. Because, I mean, a lot of people are spending more time on their screen than they are on those 5 top values that mean the most to them. So I think that's a good way to start managing time and joining with them, not telling them, here's what you need to do, right? Because they are not going to respond to that as teenagers. I tried. But, but, you know, inviting them, like I said earlier, inviting them into the problem. So here's the problem, you're getting sick, or your grades are, you know, declining, or whatever the problem is. And, you know, maybe it's, I've noticed that you're not sleeping as much, right? Or I've noticed this. How can we fix that? What can I do, right? So not just telling them what to do, but how can I support you know? And one of my daughters, I'll never forget, I was like, what can I do? Like, I can't do the homework for you, right? I can't, I go to bed before you as a teenager. I can't make sure you're in bed at a certain time. I need you to take, you know, how can we do this? And she said, would you just start doing my laundry again? Yes, I can do that. I can do your laundry.
So I think that increasingly the world is on your phone, but there's also beauty that's being forgotten. Go see somebody instead of just call and stay on the phone with them for 4 hours. Go meet them for coffee, especially if you can drive. And go see a relative, drop a line, make a phone call instead of text, you know? I don't think life is going to slow down. I don't think that the anxiety is going to lessen as our society, you know, moves into more technological ages. And so this is becoming more and more important for them to learn how to manage themselves. And I think sometimes we can get really focused on academic performance as parents. And are they on the team, and are they the best player on the team? And, you know, oh, do we have enough play? But the internal, the intrapersonal child is really, really, really going to become super important.
I tell kids and parents all the time in high school, I say, high school is not a race where the one who gets the most college credits before they graduate wins. Let's stop it. I mean, that's how I feel about it. I just think we have to help them, give them permission to step out of that competition with their peers.
Yeah, and even what I am noticing as a parent is me and my husband grew up very different backgrounds. I have a graduate degree, all of these things. My husband never set foot in college and makes probably way more money than I can dream of. And so, but in that, my kids get to see very different perspectives of like the way that they can go in life. And I see my husband offering a perspective like I am that. Come on, guys, we're gonna go to baseball. We gotta go here. He's like, bro, relax. Like they have all of these years to worry about alphabet and multiplication and all of these things. Let's pause for a day. Let's do nothing. Let's not, like every Saturday I'm like, we gotta go to the Science Center. We gotta take this class. We gotta go Home Depot and do the kids. Yeah, and he's like, or they can just have a Saturday. Like, I absolutely agree with you of like, sometimes it's not even that something has to give. I think we have to put ourselves back in the shoes of a 10-year-old or of a 13-year-old of like, what did I so desperately need? And that may just be like, we did a backyard scavenger hunt that was free because I was like, I don't feel like spending any money. Find as many pine cones as you can. and they had a blast. There were spiders in my house, but like, but they had a blast, and like they just got to pause and just be outside and not in front of a TV or having to do work or like having to build something or some STEM activity. They just got to go and get some pine cones and had a blast. And so I think that's something that we can do a lot more often too, is like just really say, you know, if something were to have to give, what would it be to support you? And I think that's a wonderful perspective.
I would say something as well too, in addition to what everyone's been saying. To Catherine, I know she had mentioned family meetings, and some people have also talked about modeling, right? And so I know this isn't a tangible answer to the time management question, but in terms of family meetings, if they are more consistent, you can have opportunities to talk about these conflicts, such as time management. And it's a good example of being able to have conflict management or conflict resolution in family meetings as well too. Just like, you're sleeping really late. How are we going to do this? They're like, oh, but I have this, and I have this, and I have this. And then being able to model, how are we going to work together as a family to figure this out? It's not just on you to figure out, but how are we going to, you know, resolve this conflict together?
It makes me feel so supported.
Yeah, and then coming back to voice, especially with teenagers, right? Like sometimes they're feeling these things, and sometimes if you're able to have that open space at the family meetings, then they're able to communicate. Like, I am expected to do all of this, and now we also have to do this and this, and there's a trip that we have to go to, and sometimes that might help parents also realize, like, oh crap, we do have a lot on the schedule, and what do we need to do as a family, and